Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very well today. It is now December 21st, yes, 2018, and we are fast approaching the end of the year and the beginning of a new year, 2019. And so as part of that season, as it were, I have been talking about certain aspects of, things that I'd like to see in the Criterion Collection in 2019. Now, I've spoken about them in previous videos, about things that I'd like to see in the Criterion Collection, things that I'd like to see Criterion challenge or endeavor to deal with or try to incorporate in the year 2019. And so to continue that conversation, I'd like to bring up another point, which is, I think, a very broad and potentially amorphous point, but it's this. The Criterion Collection is, of course, very famous and very well known and well renowned, and it is for a number of reasons, I think. The primary reason I think that the Criterion Collection is so well regarded is because of its scope and its reach and its range. The range of films that are currently in, or that is currently in the collection, I think is a very wide range, very varied. There's a nice broad variety that is currently existing in the Criterion Collection. There are films from different countries, from different time periods. Granted, I think there are certain places or time periods that are more covered than others. I admit that. I concede that point. But still, there are many different facets of cinema that I think the Criterion Collection is endeavoring to cover. And I think it does a great job in so endeavoring. And I think many countries are being well represented. Many filmmakers, I think, are well represented. Many movements in cinematic history, I think, are fairly well represented. And so I think so far, so good. And I think Criterion should be lauded for its efforts. Kudos should be given to them for trying to promote new things and different things and things that wouldn't ordinarily be made available in the quote-unquote mainstream. And you throw into the mix the work that Criterion has done with the Eclipse sets, and of course the Criterion library that had been available on its streaming service, that will probably also be available come next year. Okay, so all of this is to say that Criterion, yes, currently it's doing a very good job in terms of presenting a varied range of films. Okay, so with that in mind, what I would like to see in 2019 is a continuation of this trend by the Criterion Collection. Namely that I would love to see the Criterion Collection continue with endeavoring to maintain and achieve a high level of variety in its catalog. The key word here is variety. Now, what does that mean, variety? Now, that's therein lies the rub, right? Because variety is a very subjective thing. It can mean different things to different people. Maybe what I think as being a range of variety might differ from your concept or your conception of what consists of a varied range of films. And I completely appreciate that point, and I completely agree, and I'm very welcome. I'm open to listening to your ideas of what should be considered to be a varied range of films. I completely get that. So therefore, this discussion is potentially quite amorphous. Could be quite chaotic, actually. But from my own vantage point and my own viewpoint, and granted, my viewpoint I think is pretty close-minded in certain areas, in many areas, in fact. But with those caveats, my own viewpoint is that I think there are certain areas of the current collection that I think could do with a little bit of improvement. Of course, I think it's doing a fine job now, but there's always room for improvement. There's always room to grow. And so I'd love to see the Criterion Collection grow in these certain respects. And so what are they, from my point of view? Okay, so the first one is, I'd love to see more other countries represented in the Criterion Collection. So in the Criterion Collection, I would say you have a lot of films from Sweden, a lot of films from Japan, a lot of films from Japan, a lot of films from France, of course, a lot of films that are English language films. And so that's fine. That's perfectly fine. There is a wealth of artistic value and merit in this range, especially if you're talking about a very deep film culture, like the film culture of France, for example. Of course, we're going to see a lot of French films, and I think focusing only on French films is still a worthwhile endeavor, and one that is it is filled to the brim with great potential in terms of an educational experience, and also in terms of an enlightening experience. And the same is true for other countries, other places that I think have great representation in the Criterion Collection. Japan, that is another example. Japanese films, tons of Japanese films in the Criterion Collection. So thank goodness, because that makes me very happy, right? But unfortunately, there are other places in the world that I think are not so well represented. And so I'd love to see more representation in the Criterion Collection of these hitherto underrepresented places. So, for example, maybe places that I can think of off the top of my head would be, well, if we're talking about Asia, or Korea. So we see a lot of Japanese films in the collection, but we see, I think, only 2 Korean films in the current collection. There's The Housemaid in the World Cinema Project #1 box, and there's also Secret Sunshine. I think those are the only 2. There's also one Laserdisc. So if you count Laserdiscs, there's 3 titles overall, and I think that's very low. I'd love to see more films from Korea. Korean cinema. It's really exciting. And I'm not the biggest expert, but I was really into Korean cinema when I was in college, and maybe a little bit later. There was this new Korean new wave, so to speak, that was emerging around that time with films like Shuri and what was that film? My Sassy Girl, I think there was one. Yeah, so I think there could be more representation of films, for example, from Korea. Also, films from South America in general. That area of the world, I think, is not as well represented as it could be. And so I'd love to see more films, and hopefully more films that get a proper release. It would be nice to see more films from South American countries. It would be nice to see more films from other South Asian countries, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. It would be great to see more films from India. It would be great to see more films from other parts of Europe that I think aren't as well represented as other parts. Maybe Romania, Hungary, etc. So, and the list goes on and on. So I'd love to see more representation of other places, and I know that Criterion does its very best, and the idea of growing a collection or a film catalog can only take place one film at a time. I completely appreciate that, but still, I think there's plenty of room to grow, and I think in this respect, I think it would be really nice to see more eclipse sets in the physical media form, and perhaps Criterion trying to tackle this idea of representation of hitherto underrepresented countries. And perhaps if it's not a question of providing individual releases, I think eclipse sets would be a viable alternative. Anyway, so that's one thing I'd like to see Criterion tackle in terms of widening its variety, trying to get more films from places that have up to now been underrepresented or not represented at all. Now, silent films, of course, are in the Criterion Collection already, and we have a really nice selection. Some Charlie Chaplin films, we have some kind of obscure films. There's the maybe some films from Brazil or some films from other parts of Europe and the like. So and Harold Lloyd, etc. So there is a certain representation of silence in the Criterion Collection, but I think the Criterion Collection could do a little bit better in terms of having more representation of silent films. I would direct your attention, for example, to the Eureka Masters of Cinema selection. Now, the Eureka Masters of Cinema line is the line from the UK, so most of it's Region B. But you still have a lot of great silent films in that. And it provides a really nice representation, Buster Keaton, early German silent films, and, Man with a Movie Camera, and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and others, so many, maybe some D.W. Griffith films. And so there is a really nice representation of silence in the Eureka Masters of Cinema lineup. And I would even dare say that perhaps the silent film representation in that lineup is probably a little bit, does it eke out Criterion? I don't really want to say, but I think there is something to be said about that in the Masters of Cinema lineup, which is very strong in terms of that particular component. And so I'd like to see Criterion try to broaden its own scope by including more silence. That would be a really nice thing to see. The other thing I'd love to see is I'd like to see more films by directors who are female. And so I'd love to see more films. It's a bit of a shame because, I understand there are issues in the current nature of filmmaking and filmmaking as a process. And I understand that there are issues in terms of the industry. I think is a very male-dominated one. And so that's a bit of a shame because it prevents other voices from emerging onto the scene. This is true, I think, also of the Japanese film industry, the current film industry. I mean, you don't see a lot of you rarely see any, for instance, filmmakers who are female and who are allowed to express themselves with a large budget and the like. So I understand this is an issue not necessarily of the Criterion Collection, but this is an issue that is more systemic in terms of the process of making films. And I know this isn't particular to one country or another, but I think it's much more wide-ranging than that, which is a shame. I'd really love to see that improved. I think one way, however, to improve that situation is on the end user side of things, namely to try to promote those films that are maybe not as promoted as others. And I think that is one of the responsibilities of the Criterion Collection, like it or not, to bring to our attention films that otherwise would not have been given that much attention. And so we see films, I think the Criterion Collection is doing, as trying to do the best that it can with films by, for instance, the Agnes Varda films that Criterion has released. There's also the Chantal Akerman films that the Criterion Collection has released. There's also films like Certain Women. There's also the Barbara Loden film that was announced, Wanda, and like that. But there should be more, right? There should be more films by filmmakers who are female. And so I would love to see more of, yes, I would love to see more representation here, Criterion. And I should make a note here that I really try to avoid using the term female filmmakers or female directors, women filmmakers. I usually try to avoid that because I don't know, it's kind of weird, it's like saying, why don't we call, filmmakers who are men, why don't we call them male filmmakers, if we're going to call female filmmakers, let's call male filmmakers as well. So maybe I'll do that. I'll try to do that from now on. But I think, I'd love to see more films, not just by male filmmakers, but by female filmmakers. And so I am encouraged by Criterion's announcement for the films of 2019. So I mentioned Barbara Loden's Wanda. There's also Elaine May. That's coming to the collection, I think in early next year. And so this is very encouraging, but these are just still a couple films. There are still many, many, many films that can be introduced. And I think if Criterion, can do anything, it's to broaden not only its own horizon, but also the horizons of people like me. And I need my horizons to be more broadened because, as I say, I'm a very close-minded person. And so I need to be reminded of how great and how vast and how varied the world is. Okay, so let me end it right there. And let me ask you, what kinds of films do you think Criterion should introduce in 2019 as a means of broadening its scope and adding yet more variety to an already varied selection of films in the Criterion Collection? What films do you think should be given more emphasis? What films do you think should be given more representation? Do you think that Criterion needs to put more emphasis on certain areas over others, etc., etc.? So if you don't mind, please share with me your thoughts in the comment section below. I would love to hear what you have to say. And in the meantime, my friends, I hope you are having a really lovely time. It's December, 'tis the season, and 'tis the season to be jolly. So I hope indeed you are all feeling jolly. I think I am. It's Friday night here, so it's the end of a long week for me. So that always is a great cause for feeling jolly indeed. So I feel quite jolly. And yes, so I hope this season is treating you well. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon with respect to other things in the Criterion Collection and other labels as well. So until we meet again, my friends, let me say peace, and I hope you are all happy and healthy and well and continue to watch a lot of great movies. So please take care and cheers. And also, let me say, in the immortal words of Max Wren in Videodrome, see you in Pittsburgh.